The conclave of 70 stars had studied the universe for 12 million years. Their scientists had measured every force that existed. They had counted every type of particle. They had written down every law that governed how reality worked. Their great book of knowledge, called the Grand Unified Framework, explained everything that could ever happen in the cosmos. Every species in the galaxy learned from the framework. It told them how fast ships could travel. It told them how much energy reactors could produce. It told them what was possible and what was impossible. For 12 million years, nobody questioned it. The framework was truth. The framework was complete. Then humanity arrived. Ambassador Oral stood in the observation chamber of Research Station 12. The station floated in orbit around Earth, the third planet from a small yellow star that the humans called Sol. Through the wide windows, he could see the blue and green world below. White clouds swirled across its surface. It looked peaceful. It looked ordinary. It looked like countless other worlds the conclave had studied. But the data streaming across his screens told a different story. Oral was tall and thin, with gray skin that shifted colors when he felt strong emotions. Right now, his skin flickered between dark purple and pale white. Purple meant confusion. White meant fear. He felt both as he read the reports from the human research facilities below. The numbers made no sense. Human particle accelerators were producing readings that should have been impossible. Their machines smashed atoms together and found particles that the framework said could not exist. Their quantum computers performed calculations using methods that violated at least 4 fundamental laws. Their fusion reactors generated power at levels that the framework explicitly forbade. Oral had spent 300 years studying physics. He had earned the highest honors from the Conclave Academy. He knew the framework better than almost anyone alive. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that what the humans were doing could not work. Yet it did work. He turned away from the screens and walked to the communication console. His long fingers moved across the controls, opening a channel to the High Council on the conclave. The face of High Physicist appeared on the screen. She was old, even by conclave standards, with deep lines crossing her gray face. She had led the physics division for over 1,000 years. Her word was law in matters of science. "Ambassador Oral," she said, her voice cold and formal, "I trust you have an explanation for these anomalous reports." "I do not, High Physicist," Oral admitted. "I have the data personally. The human experiments are producing results that contradict the framework." Made a sound of dismissal. "Impossible. The framework has been tested for 12 million years. It has never failed. These humans have been traveling between stars for barely 3 centuries. They are infants in the cosmic scale. Their instruments are primitive. Their methods are crude. The error lies with them, not with our science." "I thought the same at first," Oral said. "I ordered our own scientists to replicate their experiments using conclave equipment. We followed their procedures exactly." He paused, watching face carefully. The results were the same. Skin went pure white, fear undisguised. "That cannot be." "I have the data here. I can send it to you now." "Do so," she commanded, "and continue your investigation. Find out what these humans are doing differently. Find out how they are achieving these results. There must be an explanation that fits within the framework. There must be." The communication ended. Oral stood alone in the observation chamber, staring at the blue planet below. Somewhere down there, in laboratories and research centers, humans were casually breaking laws that the conclave had believed were unbreakable. His task was clear: discover how humanity had broken physics. But as the hours passed and he studied more data, a troubling thought began to form in his mind. What if the humans had not broken anything? What if physics had always allowed these things and the conclave had simply never noticed? The thought was terrifying. It suggested that 12 million years of certainty had been built on sand. 3 days later, A human shuttle docked with Research Station 12. Oral met it in the hangar bay, curious to see these strange beings who had thrown galactic science into chaos. The shuttle door opened and a human woman stepped out. She was small by conclave standards, barely reaching Oral's chest. Her skin was a warm brown color that did not change with her emotions. Her black hair was pulled back from her face. Her dark eyes moved quickly, taking in everything around her. "Ambassador Oral," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Sarah. I've been assigned as your liaison from Earth Science Council." Oral looked at her hand for a moment, then remembered the human greeting custom. He reached out and clasped it briefly. "Welcome to Research Station 12, Doctor. I hope you can help us understand what your people are doing." Sarah smiled. "I hope so too. Though I should warn you, some of what we're doing, we don't fully understand ourselves. That's kind of the point of science, isn't it? Exploring the unknown." They walked through the station together. Oral showed her the laboratories where conclave scientists were struggling to replicate human experiments. He showed her the data analysis centers, where teams of researchers were trying to find errors in the human results. Sarah watched it all with interest. She asked questions constantly. Some of her questions were simple, the kind any student might ask, but others cut deep, touching on assumptions that Oral had never thought to question. "Why do your ships have a maximum speed?" she asked at one point. "Your engines could theoretically produce more thrust. What limits them?" "The framework limits them," Oral explained. "At higher speeds, the energy requirements become impossible to meet. The equations do not allow it." "But have you tested that? Have you actually tried to go faster?" Oral paused. "No, there would be no point. The framework tells us it is impossible." Sarah nodded slowly, but she did not seem satisfied with the answer. Later, she asked another question. "Your fusion reactors all produce power at the same efficiency level. I've seen the specifications for a dozen different species reactors, and they all hit the same ceiling. Why is that?" "Because that is the maximum efficiency allowed by the framework. The fundamental constants of the universe prevent higher outputs." "But who measured those constants? When were they established?" "The first mathematicians," Oral said proudly. 12 million years ago. They laid the foundation for all of our science. And nobody has checked their work since then." The question struck Oral like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Of course nobody had checked. Why would they? The first mathematicians were legends. Their work was sacred. To question them would be to question the very basis of conclave civilization. Wouldn't it? Over the following weeks, Sarah became a constant presence in the research station. She worked alongside conclave scientists, explaining human methods and theories. She was patient with their confusion and never mocked their assumptions, but she kept asking those uncomfortable questions. "Why do you believe this? Who tested it? How do you know it is true?" The questions spread through the research team like a virus. Scientists who had accepted the framework their entire lives began to wonder. They began to look at their experiments with new eyes. They began to notice things they had always ignored because the framework said they should not exist. Oral watched this transformation with a mixture of excitement and dread. Something was changing, something fundamental. He could feel it in the air of the station, in the whispered conversations between researchers, in the way people looked at their screens with new uncertainty. One night he found Sarah alone in the observation chamber, staring down at Earth. "Your questions are causing trouble," he said, joining her at the window. "My scientists are becoming confused. They are starting to doubt things they have believed for centuries." "Good," Sarah said quietly. "Doubt is healthy. Certainty is dangerous." "Certainty is the foundation of civilization." Maybe, or maybe certainty is just a comfortable cage. She turned to look at him. "Tell me honestly, Ambassador, in 12 million years, has the Conclave discovered anything truly new? Or have you just been refining the same ideas over and over again? Oral wanted to argue. He wanted to defend his people and their achievements. But as he searched his memory for examples of genuine breakthroughs, he found very few. The Conclave had improved existing technologies. They had explored new regions of space. They had made countless small advances. But the fundamental understanding of the universe had not changed since the first mathematicians laid down the framework 12 million years ago. I begin to see your point, he admitted. Sarah nodded. Humans have only been doing science for a few thousand years. We're still young. We're still finding out how wrong we can be. Every generation discovers that the previous generation's certainties were incomplete. It's frustrating sometimes, but it also means we're always moving forward. Even if it means admitting you were wrong. Especially then, Sarah smiled. Being wrong is how we learn. The only real failure is refusing to look at the evidence because it threatens what you already believe. Oral stood in silence for a long moment, looking down at the blue planet that had produced these strange, stubborn, magnificently curious beings. His skin shifted through colors he could not control, purple confusion giving way to green curiosity, and finally to a bright gold that he had not felt in centuries. Hoping. I think, he said slowly, I need to have another conversation with the High Council. The transmission from Research Station 12 arrived at the conclave during the night cycle. High Physicist was awakened by her personal assistant, who informed her that Ambassador Oral had sent an urgent message marked for her eyes only. She rose from her sleeping platform and went to her private communication chamber. The message played on the screen before her, and with each word, her skin grew paler and paler until it was the color of bleached bone. When the message ended, she sat in perfect stillness for a very long time. Then she called an emergency meeting of the High Council. The question Oral had asked in his message was simple. It was a question so basic that no one had thought to ask it in 12 million years, and yet it had the power to shake the foundations of everything the conclave believed. The question was this: what if the first mathematicians were wrong? Dr. Sarah stood in the great archive chamber of Research Station 12. The room stretched out before her, filled with glowing data crystals that contained the accumulated knowledge of the conclave. 12 million years of science, mathematics, and physics, all stored in neat rows that reached from floor to ceiling. It was impressive. It was overwhelming. And according to the research she had been doing for the past 2 months, much of it might be fundamentally flawed. Ambassador Oral entered the chamber behind her. His gray skin showed patches of green, which Sarah had learned meant curiosity. Over the weeks they had worked together, she had come to read his colors almost as easily as she read human facial expressions. You asked to see the original framework documents, he said. I have arranged access, but I must warn you, this is not something done lightly. These records are considered sacred by many in the conclave. I understand, Sarah said, but if we're going to figure out why human physics works differently, we need to understand where your physics came from. We need to go back to the beginning. Oral led her to a secure section of the archive. Guards stood at the entrance, their weapons gleaming under the soft lights. They looked at Sarah with obvious suspicion, but stepped aside when Oral showed his authorization codes. Inside, the chamber was smaller and darker. A single data crystal floated in the center of the room, held in place by a gentle force field. It glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The founding crystal, Oral said, his voice dropping to a whisper. It contains the original calculations of the first mathematicians. Everything in the framework traces back to this. Sarah approached the crystal carefully. A console beside it allowed her to access the data within. She activated the interface and began to read. The documents were old, written in a form of mathematical notation that had not been used for millions of years. But the conclave had provided translation algorithms, and slowly, the meaning became clear. Sarah read for hours. Oral stood beside her, watching the information scroll across the screen. Sometimes she asked him questions about certain terms or concepts. Sometimes she simply shook her head in amazement. Finally, she leaned back from the console and let out a long breath. "I think I understand now," she said. "What did you find?" Sarah turned to face him. Her expression was strange, a mixture of sympathy and something that might have been excitement. "The first mathematicians were brilliant," she said. "Truly brilliant. Their calculations are elegant and precise, but they made some assumptions at the very beginning that shaped everything that came after." "What kind of assumptions?" "Philosophical ones, about what the universe should look like, about what kinds of things were possible or impossible." Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "They believed that the universe was orderly, neat, predictable. They believed that everything had limits and boundaries and rules that could not be broken." "That is what the framework teaches," Oral agreed. "Yes, but here's the thing. When they designed their experiments, they designed them to confirm those beliefs. When they got results that didn't fit their expectations, they assumed the results were errors. They adjusted their measurements until everything matched what they thought it should be." Oral's skin flickered through several colors. "Are you saying their data?" "No, nothing so deliberate. They genuinely believed they were correcting for instrumental errors and random fluctuations. They thought they were finding the true values hidden beneath the noise. But what they were actually doing was forcing reality to fit their preconceptions." She pulled up a specific section of the documents. "Look here. This is their measurement of what they called the universal constant, the fundamental value that sets the scale for all energy interactions in the universe." Oral looked at the numbers. They were familiar to him. Every physicist in the galaxy knew the universal constant by heart. "Notice anything strange about the raw data?" Sarah asked. Oral studied the original measurements. There were hundreds of them recorded over many years of experiments, and as he looked he began to see what Sarah meant. The raw numbers varied wildly. Some were high, some were low. There was no obvious pattern. "They averaged them," he said slowly. "They took all these different measurements and calculated the average." "Exactly. And that average became the universal constant. It became the foundation of all conclave physics. But look at the distribution of the original values. It's not random noise around a central point. It's all over the place. That suggests the constant isn't actually constant at all." "But that's impossible. The universal constant must be constant. Otherwise, the universe would be chaos." Sarah smiled gently. "Would it? Or would it just be different from what you expected?" The implications hit Oral like a wave. If the universal constant varied, then the limits set by the framework were not absolute. Energy could be extracted at higher rates under certain conditions. Ships could travel faster in certain regions of space. Reactions that were considered impossible might actually work, depending on local variations in the constant. Human science worked because humans had never accepted the universal constant as truly constant. They had kept measuring, kept testing, kept finding situations where the rules behaved differently than expected. And instead of discarding those results as errors, they had investigated them. 12 million years, Oral said. His voice was barely a whisper. For 12 million years, we have been limiting ourselves based on an assumption that was never true. Not entirely untrue, Sarah said kindly. The framework is a very good approximation. It works in most situations, but it's not the whole picture. It's like, imagine you spent your whole life in a valley. You would think the world was flat because that's what you could see. But if you climbed the mountain, you would discover the world was round. We never climbed the mountain. You never thought there was a mountain to climb. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Oral straightened his shoulders. His skin shifted to a determined shade of deep blue. We must tell the High Council. Sarah nodded. I know, but I should warn you they might not want to hear it. People don't like having their foundations shaken. No, Oral agreed. They do not. But truth is truth, whether we like it or not. That is something the conclave taught me long ago. It seems we forgot to apply it to ourselves. He turned and walked toward the archive exit. Sarah followed, matching his pace. What do you think will happen? She asked. I do not know. There will be resistance. There will be denial. There will be those who say this is all a human trick designed to undermine our civilization. Oral paused at the door. But there will also be those who see this as an opportunity. Scientists who have always felt constrained by the framework. Explorers who wondered what lay beyond the limits. Young people who dreamed of impossibilities. Every species has those, Sarah said. Yes, and perhaps that is what we have in common, the desire to know more, the refusal to accept that we have learned everything there is to learn. Oral looked back at the founding crystal, glowing softly in its chamber. The first mathematicians were great thinkers, but they made the mistake of believing they had reached the end of knowledge. We made the mistake of believing them. And now we begin again. The message to the High Council was sent that night. It included all of Sarah's findings, all of Oral's analysis, and a simple conclusion that would shake the conclave to its core. The framework was incomplete. Human science was not broken. The universe was larger and stranger than anyone had imagined. And for the first time in 12 million years, true discovery was possible once more. The response from the High Council came 3 days later. High Physicist would travel to Research Station 12 personally. She would examine the evidence. She would speak with the human scientist. And then she would decide the fate of everything the conclave believed. The Great Debate Hall of the conclave was the largest enclosed space ever built by any species in the galaxy. Its domed ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed inside, drifting beneath the painted stars that decorated its surface. Seats for millions of representatives descended in endless tiers toward the central platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Today, every seat was filled. Ambassador Oral stood on the platform, feeling very small beneath the weight of so many watching eyes. Beside him stood Dr. Sarah and High Physicist, 3 figures at the center of a storm that had been building for months. The journey to this moment had been difficult, had come to Research Station 12 expecting to debunk the human findings. Instead, she had spent weeks in the archives, running her own tests, checking and rechecking the evidence. When she finally emerged, her face had been gray with shock. It is true, she had told Oral. All of it, we have been blind. Together, they had prepared a presentation for the full conclave assembly. It would explain what the humans had discovered. It would reveal the flaws in the framework. It would propose a new approach to science, one based on constant questioning rather than accepted truth. But first, they had to convince millions of beings to abandon 12 million years of certainty. Stepped forward to address the assembly. Her voice, amplified by the hall systems, echoed across the vast space. I have been the High Physicist for over 1,000 years. In that time, I have defended the framework against every challenge. I have dismissed evidence that contradicted our accepted knowledge. I have silenced scientists who asked uncomfortable questions. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Representatives shifted in their seats, exchanging glances of disbelief. 300 years ago, a new species joined the galactic community. They were young. They were primitive by our standards. They had been traveling between stars for barely a moment in cosmic terms. We expected to teach them. We expected them to learn from our wisdom. His voice hardened. Instead, they taught us. They showed us something we had forgotten. They showed us how to doubt. She gestured to Sarah, who stepped forward. The human woman looked impossibly small on the vast platform, but her voice was steady. My people have a saying, Sarah said. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. We've only been doing science for a few thousand years, but we've already overturned our understanding of the universe many times. We learned that the Earth was not the center of existence. We learned that solid matter was mostly empty space. We learned that time and space were the same thing, bent and shaped by mass and energy. She smiled slightly. We've been wrong so many times that being wrong doesn't scare us anymore. What scares us is the idea that we might stop looking for better answers. Sarah explained the findings from the archive. She showed the original data of the first mathematicians. She demonstrated how their assumptions had shaped their conclusions. She presented the human experiments that proved the framework's limits were not absolute. The assembly listened in stunned silence. When she finished, a representative from one of the oldest conclave species rose to speak. His name was Al, and he had opposed the human integration from the beginning. "This is absurd," he declared. "You ask us to throw away 12 million years of accumulated knowledge based on the claims of a species that was living in caves when the framework was established. The first mathematicians were the greatest minds our galaxy has ever produced. These humans are children playing with forces they do not understand." Sarah nodded calmly. "You're right that we don't fully understand these forces. That's exactly the point. We know we don't understand, so we keep trying to learn more. But with respect, I don't think your first mathematicians understood everything either. No one can. The universe is too big, too strange, too full of surprises. The framework has guided our civilization for 12 million years, Al countered. It has brought stability, progress, prosperity. You would have us abandon all of that for your human chaos." "I'm not asking you to abandon anything," Sarah said. "The framework is still useful. It still describes how the universe works in most situations. But it's not the whole truth. It's a good map, but the territory is bigger than the map shows. All I'm suggesting is that we keep exploring." Another representative rose, a young scientist from a species that had joined the conclave only a few thousand years ago. Her name was, and her skin glowed with excited colors. "I have read the human research," said. "I have studied their methods. They do not claim to have all the answers. They only claim that more answers exist. What is wrong with looking for them? What is wrong with asking questions?" "Questions lead to uncertainty," Al replied. "Uncertainty leads to chaos. Certainty leads to stagnation," countered. "We have not made a truly fundamental discovery in millions of years. We have only refined what we already knew. Is that really progress? Or is it just very elaborate standing still?" The debate continued for hours. Representatives argued passionately on both sides. Some defended the framework with fierce loyalty. Others expressed excitement at the possibility of new discoveries. Many simply seemed confused, struggling to process the idea that everything they had been taught might be incomplete. Finally, Oral stepped forward to speak. His skin had settled into a calm blue, the color of deep thought. "I have spent my life studying the framework," he said. "I believed in it completely. When I first saw the human data, I was certain there had to be an error. The universe could not work the way their experiments suggested." He looked out at the assembled millions. But the evidence was clear. Human science produces results that contradict our framework, not because humans are wrong, but because our framework is incomplete. This is not a failure of conclave science. It is an opportunity. For the first time in 12 million years, we have the chance to learn something truly new. Oral turned to look at the great dome above, painted with stars that the conclave had been studying since before humanity existed. "The humans have not broken physics," he declared. "They have reminded us what science truly means, not the preservation of comfortable answers, but the endless pursuit of better questions. We built a cage of certainty and called it knowledge. They have shown us the door was never locked." The hall fell silent. Then slowly a sound began to build. It started within a handful of young scientists, but it spread through the assembly like fire. Applause, agreement, hope. Not everyone joined in. Al and his conservative faction sat in stony silence, but they were fewer than Oral had feared. The vote was called. Should the conclave adopt what Sarah had called the new framework, an approach based on perpetual questioning rather than absolute certainty? The results came in from millions of voting stations across the hall. The motion passed by the narrowest of margins. Oral stood on the platform watching the numbers flash across the displays. His skin shifted through colors too fast to follow: relief, joy, fear, excitement, all mixed together in a rainbow of emotion. Beside him, Sarah let out a long breath. "Well," she said, "that's done." "That's started," Oral corrected. "It will take to rebuild what we thought we knew. There will be resistance at every step. Many will refuse to accept the new ideas." "That's okay. That's how it should be." Sarah smiled. "If everyone accepted new ideas immediately, we'd never be able to separate the good ones from the bad ones. Resistance forces us to prove our case. It makes our understanding stronger." Approached them. The old high physicist looked exhausted but somehow younger than she had in years. "I never thought I would see this day," she said. "I spent 1,000 years defending walls that I now realize were prisons. I do not know if I can adjust to this new way of thinking." "You don't have to adjust all at once," Sarah said gently. "Take your time, ask questions, follow the evidence. That's all anyone can do." Nodded slowly. Then, for the first time since Sarah had met her, she smiled. "You know," the high physicist said, "this is actually quite exciting. I had forgotten what it felt like to not know something. I had forgotten how wonderful it is to have questions without answers." They walked together out of the great debate hall. Outside, crowds had gathered to hear the results of the vote. Representatives from dozens of species mingled in the plaza, talking and arguing and speculating about what would come next. Oral looked up at the sky. Stars were beginning to appear as evening fell. Stars that had been studied for 12 million years. Stars that suddenly seemed full of new mysteries. "What happens now?" he asked Sarah. Now we get to work. There's a whole universe out there that we've only begun to understand. And for the first time in 12 million years, your people are ready to really look at it. It seems almost too large to comprehend, all that unknown territory." Sarah laughed. "That's the best part. It's always too large to comprehend. Every time we think we're getting close to understanding everything, we discover how much more there is to learn. The universe keeps getting bigger and stranger the more we explore it." "That sounds terrifying." "It is terrifying and wonderful and frustrating and amazing." Sarah looked up at the same stars. "That's what science is supposed to feel like. Not comfortable certainty, but wild curiosity, the excitement of not knowing what you'll find next." Oral considered this. His skin settled into a warm gold color. Hope, anticipation, the joy of new beginnings. "I think," he said slowly, "I could learn to enjoy that feeling." "I think you will." They stood together in the plaza, watching the stars emerge one by one. Around them, the conclave was changing. Old certainties were crumbling. New questions were being asked. The comfortable cage of the framework was opening at last. It would be difficult. It would be challenging. Many would resist. Many would fail to adapt. But the door to true discovery had been opened, and it could never be fully closed again. And walking beside the conclave into that unknown future were the strange, stubborn, magnificently curious beings who had broken their physics by doing what they themselves had forgotten was possible. Asking what if we are wrong? Asking what else is out there? Asking what comes next? The universe stretched out before them, infinite and mysterious and full of surprises. And for the first time in 12 million years, the conclave of 70 stars was ready to explore it with open eyes and questioning minds. The humans had not brought them answers. They had brought something far more valuable. They had brought them wonder.